Elias Thorne looked up at the towering form of Empress Kaelen, 12 feet of sculpted, shimmering amethyst and raw, untamed power, and felt the words bubble up from a place deeper than protocol, deeper than fear. "They call you too much," he whispered, the sound swallowed by the cavernous throne room's hush. "But they're blind." Before we lose ourselves in this tale of galactic defiance and unexpected love, do us a favor and hit that subscribe button. Your next HFY romance fix is just a notification away. The Grand Aurelian Hall was a masterpiece of intimidating architecture, designed to make supplicants feel like insignificant insects. Pillars of obsidian streaked with veins of liquid gold stretched towards a ceiling lost in a perpetual twilight, where holographic constellations slowly drifted. The air itself was heavy with the scent of ozone and rare incense, a fragrance meant to cleanse the space of lesser beings. The Aurelians themselves were a species of willowy elegance, all slender limbs and graceful necks, moving with a fluid precision that spoke of millennia of cultivated refinement. And then there was their empress. Kaelen was a living contradiction to her own people's aesthetics. Where they were slender, she was broad and powerfully built. Where they were delicate, she was solid, substantial, a force of nature carved from living amethyst. At 12 feet tall, she towered over her tallest guards. Her shoulders were a warrior's, her hips curved with a regal strength that the court whispered about with disdain. Her skin was a deep, luminous violet that seemed to drink the light and glow from within, and her hair was a cascade of pure silver, like a river of mercury flowing down her back. A crown of jagged, dark crystal sat upon her brow, less a decoration and more a warning. She descended the dais of her onyx throne, each step a resonant click that echoed like a heartbeat in the silent hall. Every official, every advisor, lowered their gaze, not in respect, but in a mixture of fear and profound discomfort. She was their ruler, their apex, and their greatest embarrassment. Only one figure did not look away, a lone human, dressed in the simple gray jumpsuit of an interstellar engineer, his posture not of defiance but of pure, unadulterated awe. Elias Thorne was supposed to present his technical reports on the palace's failing energy grid with stoic professionalism. Instead, he found his mind wiped clean of data and diagnostics, filled only with the staggering vision before him. And for the first time in a decade, something shifted behind Kaelen's eyes, which were the color of molten sapphire. Not the familiar flash of impatience or the cold frost of command, but a flicker of something fragile, something startled, as if a door she had long thought sealed shut had been nudged ajar by a gentle, unexpected breeze. The Aurelian High Council watched, their slender faces etched with silent disapproval. This human, this fragile, pink-skinned creature, was staring. It was beyond improper. It was a desecration of their rigid etiquette. Empress Kaelen's voice, when it came, was low and resonant, a vibration that Elias felt in his bones. "Engineer Thorne, you have your report." Elias opened his mouth, the carefully prepared summary on his lips, but the words dissolved into dust. His training, his briefing, all of it vanished from his mind, leaving only a raw, unfiltered truth. "Your radiance," he breathed out, the title feeling inadequate. "You're staggering." A sound like a sharp intake of breath from 100 throats filled the hall. Kaelen actually took a half-step back, her amethyst hand coming up to rest lightly on the solid curve of her hip. "Staggering?" she repeated, the word foreign and clumsy on her tongue. No one used such words for her. They used imposing, commanding, sometimes behind her back, monstrous. Never this. Her chief advisor, a gaunt Aurelian named Lyros, hissed a whisper that was meant to be quiet but carried in the silence. "The human insults you, your radiance. He mocks." But Elias wasn't mocking. His eyes, a warm, earthy brown, were wide with genuine wonder, and they were drifting embarrassingly over the powerful lines of her body, from the strong column of her neck, down across the impressive swell of her chest, to the solid curve of her waist. Kaelen followed his gaze, her skin flushing a darker, warmer shade of violet. She instinctively pulled the sheer silver gossamer of her robe tighter across her torso. "Human," she said, her voice sharper now, a blade of control. Your culture must have peculiar standards. The best, Elias replied without a heartbeat of hesitation. Then, realizing how that sounded, he ran a hand through his messy brown hair. I just mean your people are all grace and lines like reeds, but you. He gestured vaguely, helplessly, up at her magnificent form. You're a mountain, a gorgeous, purple mountain. She stared at him. The hall held its breath. He had not just breached protocol. He had incinerated the entire book of diplomatic engagement. The Empress of the Aurelian Star Dominion felt a strange, warm tremor in her chest. He thinks I'm gorgeous. The thought was so alien it was dizzying. He thinks this is gorgeous. Her voice, when she found it again, was softer, despite her best efforts. Your candor is unorthodox. Elias gave a lopsided, devastatingly human grin. It's my default setting. Her tailor and advisors exchanged looks of pure horror. Kaelen, however, found her pulse thrumming in a rhythm she did not recognize. She took a deliberate step closer, using her height, her sheer physical presence as the weapon it had always been, a reminder of the insurmountable gap between her and everyone else. But Elias didn't flinch. He just tilted his head back further, his expression one of open, uncomplicated admiration. She swallowed, suddenly hyper-aware that the top of his head wouldn't even reach her sternum. She could close her hand around his bicep and her fingers would touch. She could lift him with one arm. Why did that thought not send him running? Why did it make her own breath catch? She didn't have an answer. Not yet. But as she looked down at the small, fearless human who saw a mountain where her people saw a mistake, she felt the first, dangerous spark of a curiosity that threatened to consume her. Who was this man who found beauty in her excess? If the throne room had been silent before, it was now a tomb of suspended animation. Every Aurelian in the chamber watched Elias as if he had not just complimented their empress but had declared war on their entire concept of aesthetics. Yet he stood there, a mere 6 feet of utterly unbothered humanity, hands now clasped loosely behind his back, looking up at Kaelen with the serene expression of a man who had just stated a simple, obvious fact and saw no need for further discussion. Kaelen exhaled slowly, the sound a soft rush of air in the stifling quiet. Her people expected a reaction, a rebuke, banishment, a sharp command to remember his place. But the words, staggering and gorgeous, echoed in her mind, weaving a spell that neutralized a lifetime of ingrained shame. She could not punish this sincerity. It felt like punishing a sunbeam for being warm. She cleared her throat, the sound unnaturally loud. Engineer Thorne, she began, summoning every ounce of her imperial training to layer her tone with frost. Perhaps we should adjourn to the solar spire to review your findings. The technical schematics will require focused attention. Of course, he replied, his smile not fading but softening, as if she were a sunrise he was privileged to witness. Lead the way, your radiance. Her heart did something entirely undignified and fluttered against her ribs. They moved together through the grand promenade, a wide avenue of polished moonstone that ran along the spine of the palace, open to the swirling violet and emerald hues of the nebula outside. Flanked by her silent, armored guards, Kaelen was acutely aware of Elias's proximity. He stayed close, far closer than any Aurelian would dare, his shoulder nearly brushing against the lower part of her thigh. Is it customary for humans to maintain such minimal personal distance? She asked carefully, her gaze fixed straight ahead. Nah, Elias said, his voice casual and light. I'm just trying to save my neck from a permanent crick from looking up at you all the time. Her steps faltered for a fraction of a second. His tone was so effortlessly flirtatious, completely devoid of the sycophantic fear or thinly veiled disgust she was accustomed to. Her cheeks warmed. Apologies, she muttered, the words automatic. I am aware my stature is disproportionate. Elias blinked up at her. Disproportionate? Kaelen, you're... He hesitated, then lowered his voice, though the guards could undoubtedly still hear. You're magnificent. She nearly stumbled. Her guards, trained to stoic perfection, flinched in unison. Kaelen recovered through sheer force of imperial will, straightening her spine until it felt like it might crack. "I appreciate your unique perspective," she said stiffly, "even if it stands in stark contrast to the sensibilities of my people." "Yeah, I noticed," Elias replied, glancing pointedly at a pair of courtiers who quickly averted their eyes from Kaelen's form, their expressions pinched. "Back on Earth, you'd have poets writing sonnets about you. Artists would go to war for the chance to sculpt you." She coughed, a genuine, startled choke that was the most undignified sound she had made in public since her childhood. Her guards twitched, their hands edging towards the energy hilts of their weapons. Elias just looked concerned. "You okay?" "Artists," she managed to wheeze, her entire face burning with a violet heat. "Va." "Well, yeah," he said, utterly sincere. "You're a muse, a walking, talking inspiration. It's kind of your thing, isn't it?" Her entire being seemed to short-circuit. She had to look away, focusing on the intricate patterns of the floor, before she did something truly Empress-like, such as faint. Later, in the solar spire, a circular room with walls of transparent alloy offering a breathtaking, dizzying view of the star-dusted void, Kaelen tried desperately to be professional. She sat upon her designated observation throne, a chair of woven crystal and starlight, while Elias stood before a holographic projection of the palace's power grid. But his attention was divided. He kept glancing from the shimmering energy lines to her, his eyes tracing the lines of her face, then drifting downward, lingering on the powerful shape of her arms, then lower, to where her hips curved against the throne. By the third time, she caught him in the act. Her voice wavered. "Engineer Thorne, the conduit fluctuations on the western spire require your analysis." He blinked, pulled from his reverie. "Oh, right. Sorry. It's just hard to focus when the most impressive piece of engineering in the room is you." Her ears, long and elegantly tapered, felt like they were on fire. "I am not an engineering project," she snapped, a desperate, flustered edge to her voice. "Of course not," he said, his grin returning. "You're a masterpiece. There's a difference." She actually squeaked. The sound was so small, so un-Empress-like, that for a moment she thought someone else had made it. The Empress, the woman who could command fleets and shatter asteroids with a glance, had squeaked. Because of a human. Elias's grin widened, but it wasn't cruel. It was delighted. Seeing that he had flustered her, he softened, his expression becoming unbearably earnest. "Kaelen," he said, his voice dropping, the sound intimate in the vast space. "Your people don't see it, but you're breathtaking. You don't need to hide from that." Her hands tightened on the arms of her throne. She wanted to believe him with a desperation that was physically painful, but belief was a luxury that had been beaten out of her by decades of scornful glances and whispered slurs. When the technical review was concluded, Elias approached her. He gave a small bow, not the deep, formal prostration of her subjects, but a warm, respectful dip of his head that made her own lips twitch in response. "Thank you for your time, Your Radiance. It is my duty to ensure the palace's systems are functional," she said, the response automatic, robotic. He took a small step closer, close enough that she could feel the faint warmth radiating from his body, a tiny sun standing before her. "But you didn't have to be kind," he murmured, his voice so low it was almost a secret shared just between them. Her breath caught in her throat. She was not prepared for his softness, for the sheer, unvarnished sincerity in his eyes. "I am not often described that way," she admitted, the confession torn from her before she could stop it. "Well," Elias said, sending her a look that was so openly, brazenly appreciative it felt like a physical touch. "They're wrong." She froze. He waited, and for one dangerously fragile, heart-stopping moment, she felt something she had not felt since she was a girl, long before the crown, long before the isolation. She felt wanted. That night, in the profound quiet of her private chambers, Kaelen stood before a floor-to-ceiling mirror of polished obsidian. She stared at her reflection. A towering, amethyst-skinned woman with curves her people called overabundant, and a presence that made planets negotiate carefully. Her reflection stared back, uncertain. One human, just one, had looked at her like she was art, like she was the standard, not the exception. She touched the solid curve of her own chest, feeling a warmth there that had nothing to do with her body's natural temperature regulation. Then, quietly, her voice a mere whisper against the silence, she repeated the word he had given her. Magnificent. The word trembled on her tongue, foreign and sweet, and for the first time in her life, it did not feel like a lie. The palace kitchens had never known such controlled chaos. Servants in pristine silver uniforms darted between gleaming counters, their long fingers balancing platters of steaming, iridescent fungi and crystal goblets filled with swirling luminescent wine, their usually serene faces etched with a panic they could not fully conceal. The Empress's private dining salon had not been used for a guest in over 15 standard cycles. Not for nobles, not for allied ambassadors, certainly not for potential suitors who always found her presence overwhelming. So when the imperial command had echoed through the staff channels, a meal for two, the Empress and the human engineer, the entire palace infrastructure had shuddered with the weight of the unprecedented. Kaelen herself stood before the mirror in her innermost sanctum, trying and failing to calm the frantic rhythm of her heart. She adjusted the neckline of her gown for what felt like the 100th time. It was a formal dinner dress, a deep plum velvet that was both sumptuous and severe, cut to follow the powerful lines of her body in a way that made her feel intensely vulnerable. She felt exposed, overwhelming, too much. Her chief handmaiden had insisted it was the pinnacle of regal fashion. Elias would see her in it. The thought made her want to dematerialize. The private dining salon was a vast, intimate space, its ceiling a dome of clear transsteel that offered an uninhibited view of the twin moons casting their silver light over the capital city. At its center stood a table carved from a single, massive piece of obsidian, its surface polished to a mirror shine, large enough to seat 20 of her size. Kaelen sat at one end, her custom-built chair a throne in its own right, and felt a wave of foolishness. The distance to the other end was absurd. When Elias was ushered in by two silent guards, he stepped into the room and stopped dead. His eyes, those warm, human eyes, widened, his pupils dilating in the soft light. His mouth opened slightly, and for a long, suspended moment, he simply stared, his data pad forgotten in his slack hand. Kaelen froze, her muscles locking. He thinks I look ridiculous. He sees the spectacle they all see. A giant in a fine dress, playing at being elegant. You look, Elias started, his voice hushed, almost reverent. You look like a goddess. Her stomach performed a complicated acrobatic maneuver. A goddess? She repeated, the word feeling dangerous and sacrilegious on her tongue. He nodded, his gaze sweeping over her from the silver crown in her hair down to the delicate, silver-shod toes of her feet. That dress is a declaration of war on every other beautiful thing in this galaxy. She nearly fumbled the intricate crystal wine glass she was holding. Engineer Thorne, she managed, her voice strained. That is a highly inappropriate observation. But is it inaccurate? He asked, his eyes flicking once more, brazenly, over the curve of her hip before he snapped them back up to her face. My apologies, Your Radiance. You just... Wow. Kaelen's cheeks burned with such intensity she was sure they were emitting their own light. She gestured with a slightly trembling hand towards the much smaller, human-scaled chair that had been placed not at the far end of the table, but surprisingly close to her own. He climbed into it, his legs dangling just slightly above the floor. She tried very hard not to find the image endearing and failed miserably. You agreed to dine with me, she said carefully, folding her enormous hands on the table before her. To discuss the final implementation schedule for the power grid upgrades? Elias offered a faint, knowing smile. Sure, we can talk about plasma conduits and capacitor arrays too. Her pulse did a little skip-hop. The first course was served, a delicate broth shimmering with edible starlight. Elias reached for his spoon, But the utensil, like everything else, was designed for Aurelian hands. It was comically large in his grip. He tried to dip it into the bowl, but the bowl itself was massive and heavy. He fumbled, and the entire delicate vessel teetered, threatening to spill its glowing contents across the pristine obsidian. Kaelen reacted without thought. Her hand, large enough to palm his entire head, shot out and steadied the bowl, her fingers brushing against his. A jolt, like a static shock but warmer, passed between them. He jolted slightly. She froze. The sheer scale difference was never more apparent. Her fingers, long and elegant and powerful, dwarfed his slender, capable human hand. If she were to cup his cheek, she would engulf the side of his face. The thought did not repulse her. It made her chest feel tight and her breath catch. Elias didn't pull his hand away. He looked up at her, his expression not one of fear or embarrassment, but of that same open, warm curiosity. "Thanks," he said softly, his thumb unconsciously stroking the side of her index finger. She withdrew her hand as if scorched. "It is of no consequence," she said, too quickly. They ate in a silence that was thick with unspoken words until Elias set down his impractical spoon and leaned back in his chair, studying her. "So," he began, his tone deceptively casual, "how come I'm the first person you've invited to dinner in—" What did the scullery bot mutter? 15 cycles. Her own utensil clattered against her plate. The sound was deafening. "My presence," she murmured, her gaze dropping to her own lap, to the velvet stretched tight over her powerful thighs, "makes others uncomfortable." Elias frowned, a genuine crease forming between his brows. "Why?" She made a helpless, sweeping gesture that encompassed her height, her build, the very substance of her. "Because I am the largest of my kind," she whispered, the confession tasting like ash. "Obscenely so. They call me overabundant, excessive, too much to be, well, to be anything but alone." Elias stared at her for a long, electric moment, his expression shifting from confusion to something akin to outrage. Then he shook his head slowly, a look of pure, unadulterated incredulity on his face. "That's the most insane thing I've ever heard." She blinked. "Excuse me?" "You're Kaelen," he said, as if that explained everything. "You're powerful. You're intelligent. You're, and I cannot stress this enough, gorgeous. And yes, you're big." His eyes flicked, for a heart-stopping second, to the impressive swell of her chest, then guiltily away again. "But that's not a flaw. That's the best part." Her breath hitched. She straightened abruptly, her pride warring with the desperate hope his words ignited. "Do all humans share this perspective?" "Most," Elias said, then added with a crooked, devastating grin. "Some of us are just a lot more enthusiastic about it than others." She narrowed her molten sapphire eyes, leaning forward slightly, the action making the entire table seem to shrink. "And which are you?" "Enthusiastic," he said, without a single heartbeat of hesitation. Her heart felt like it was trying to escape her ribcage. Halfway through the main course, a roasted fowl from a low-gravity world that tasted of cinnamon and sunshine, her chief advisor Lyros attempted to interrupt, likely to remind her of a prior engagement or the political optics of this entire situation. Kaelen silenced him with a single, glacial look that promised consequences far colder than any diplomatic scandal. Ethan noticed. "You have to do that a lot, don't you?" he asked once the sputtering Lyros had retreated. "Stand up to them." "It is a requirement of my station," she replied, her voice regal once more. "Earlier," he said gently, his eyes soft, "when I called you a goddess," she nearly choked on her wine, "I did not show weakness. You blushed so hard I think the moons shifted orbit." She covered her face with one massive, elegant hand, utterly mortified. He laughed, a warm, rich sound that filled the cavernous room and seemed to bounce off the stars themselves. It was a teasing laugh, but never cruel. "I do not blush," she insisted from behind her hand. "Then your face does a very convincing impression of it," he shot back. She lowered her hand just enough to glare at him over her fingertips. "You are intolerably bold." "I've been told that," he said, his eyes glinting with mischief. "Usually right before someone decides to kiss me." Her jaw went slack. "Kisses? You presume that I would?" He leaned his elbow on the table, completely at ease, and smirked up at her. "Not tonight, but someday, maybe." Kaelen could barely form a coherent thought. Her heart was a wild drum against her ribs. Her palms were damp. Her entire being was vibrating with a strange, fiery thrill. Lyros was right. This human was dangerous. Dangerous in a way she had never known she craved. By the time dessert was served, a delicate gelée that shimmered with captured nebula light, she was no longer sitting with rigid, imperial posture. She was leaning towards him, her body angled into the space between them, close enough that the faint warmth from his small human form was a constant, tantalizing presence. And Elias, he looked like he could have sat there for cycles, just talking, just being. As he rose to leave, he paused at the arched doorway and glanced back at her, his expression softening into something unbearably sincere. "Thank you for dinner, Kaelen," he said, her name a caress on his lips. "No one back on Earth will ever believe I shared a meal with the most stunning woman in the entire universe." Her vision blurred at the edges for a single treacherous second. When he was gone, the great doors sealing shut behind him, Kaelen stared at the empty chair across from her. Her lips trembled. Stunning. He had called her stunning. And this time, she didn't try to armor herself against the word. This time, she wrapped it around her shoulders like a cloak and let its warmth seep into her bones. The silence in Kaelen's private chambers was a physical weight after Elias left, a stark contrast to the warm, lively space his presence had created. The ghost of his laughter seemed to cling to the air, and the memory of his smile was a brand on her mind, hotter and more vivid than the star her palace orbited. His words, magnificent, gorgeous, stunning, echoed in an endless, dizzying loop until she had to grip the cool railing of her balcony to keep her feet firmly planted on the floor. She had commanded star systems and quelled rebellions, yet the simple, earnest compliments of one human engineer were proving to be a force more destabilizing than any political coup. This was a problem, a beautiful, intoxicating problem that she had no idea how to solve, only that she did not want it to stop. The next morning, Elias moved through the palace's gleaming corridors with a data pad tucked under his arm, a picture of focused nonchalance. He was acutely aware of the stares from the willowy Aurelian nobles who passed him, their expressions a cocktail of offense, bewilderment, and thinly veiled scorn. Their whispers slithered through the air like serpents. "Is that the human? The one she dined with privately? I heard she laughed. The Empress actually laughed." Others, their voices laced with a sharper venom, hissed. "She is too massive to be taken seriously. He is clearly manipulating her for some human advantage. It is undignified, an embarrassment to the crown." Elias heard every word, his human ears surprisingly adept at picking up the subtle, malicious frequencies of gossip, but he let them wash over him, his expression neutral, his stride unwavering. He whistled a soft, off-key tune from a forgotten Earth folk song, a shield of cheerful indifference against their judgment. From her secluded viewing terrace high above, Kaelen watched him. She saw the way he navigated the disdain with a quiet confidence that spoke of a life unburdened by the weight of physical judgment, a life where one's body was not a constant source of commentary and shame. Her chest ached with a strange, fierce protectiveness. He did not deserve their scorn. He who saw beauty where her own people saw only a flaw in their genetic tapestry. She envied his easy confidence. She admired it. She wanted, with a sudden, startling intensity, to understand the source of it. She wanted to understand him. Later, when he was sequestered in the council archives, surrounded by floating holographic scrolls of treaty law and technical schematics, Kaelen found him. She approached with a silence that belied her size, pausing in the doorway to simply observe. He was perched on a floating stool, his brow furrowed in concentration as he tapped and swiped through the glowing documents, muttering under his breath in that fascinating, rapid-fire human language. If they wanted the tertiary plasma relays calibrated to the harmonic frequency, why didn't they just say that in section 4.7? Approximate resonance is not a technical term, it's a recipe for a core breach. Honestly. His hair was a mess, as if he'd been running his hands through it repeatedly, and his sleeves were rolled up to his elbows, revealing the corded muscles of his forearms. Kaelen stared, her gaze lingering far longer than was appropriate for an empress observing a lowly engineer. He was endearing, ridiculously, captivatingly so. She stepped into the archive, the soft glow of her amethyst skin casting a new light into the room. Elias looked up, and the transformation was instantaneous. He straightened so quickly his stool wobbled precariously. "Kael, your radiance. I didn't see you there. You were absorbed?" She agreed, her voice low and, she hoped, calm. "Yes, well, these documents have more subclauses than a supernova has particles. But it's a fine part of the job." He forced a smile that didn't quite reach his tired eyes. She tilted her head, studying him. "You are stressed." He let out a short, surprised laugh. "Is it that obvious?" "To me, yes." He blinked, then, to her utter astonishment, a faint pink blush crept up his neck and into his cheeks. He blushed. The sight sent a warm, fluttering sensation through her chest that was entirely new and completely overwhelming. "May I assist you?" she asked, taking a step closer, the floor seeming to vibrate gently with her movement. He stared up at her. How? No offense, Your Radiance, but this is pretty technical engineering jargon. Dampening fields, quantum harmonics." She reached down, her movements fluid and precise, and plucked the primary holographic tablet from his hands. Her fingers, so vast compared to the device, manipulated the interface with a delicate expertise that made his eyes widen. She scanned the dense text, her luminous blue eyes moving back and forth at an impossible speed. You memorized these protocols?" he asked, his voice full of awe. "I drafted half of them," she replied dryly, not looking up from the text. He gaped openly. "You wrote the Imperial Energy Grid protocols?" She paused, one elegant, silver eyebrow lifting as she finally met his gaze. "You assumed I merely sit upon a throne and look imposing." I know," he stammered, the blush deepening. "Okay, maybe a little." Kaelen allowed a small, genuine smile to touch her lips before she could stop it. "Come," she said, deactivating the tablet with a flick of her wrist. "You require a change of atmosphere. This room is stifling." "Atmosphere?" Elias echoed, climbing off his stool. "Is that a diplomatic term for I'm about to be spaced for incompetence?" "It is literal," she said, her long fingers dancing across a hidden command panel on the archive wall. With a soft hum, a section of the wall shimmered and dissolved, revealing not another corridor, but a hidden, open-air courtyard. The sight that greeted them was breathtaking. Bioluminescent flora pulsed with soft, internal light in hues of cerulean and magenta. A waterfall of liquid light cascaded down a wall of living crystal into a pool that swirled with captured starlight. Floating stone pathways, unsupported by any visible means, spiraled gracefully through the air, connecting floating islands of lush, alien vegetation. The air itself was alive with the soft, chiming songs of unseen creatures. Elias's jaw dropped. "Okay," he breathed, his stress visibly melting away. That's incredible. This is the Selenian Garden," Kaelen explained, a note of pride in her voice. "A place for quiet contemplation. It is shielded from the rest of the palace. No one will disturb us here." She led the way, her steps sure on the floating path. Elias followed, his head on a swivel, trying to take in every impossible detail. "Do you come here often?" he asked, his voice hushed in the serene atmosphere. "I used to," she said, her tone softening with memory. "When I was younger, before the crown, it became difficult to find the time, and the silence here began to feel less like peace and more like loneliness." Elias was quiet for a moment, his eyes on the shimmering waterfall. It doesn't feel lonely now, he said softly. Kaelen looked down at him, at the way the garden's ethereal light played across his human features, and her heart gave a powerful single thud. No, she agreed, her voice barely a whisper. It does not. They walked in a comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds the chime of the flora and the gentle rush of the luminous water. It was Elias who broke the silence, his question tentative. The way they talk about you, the nobles, has it always been like that? Kaelen's shoulders tightened almost imperceptibly. Since my growth cycle surpassed the 95th percentile for my species, yes. I was meant to be a symbol of Aurelian grace. I became a symbol of something else entirely. An anomaly, a statistical error made flesh. They're fools, Elias said, the conviction in his voice absolute and unshakable. Every last one of them. He stopped walking and turned to face her, forcing her to stop as well. He looked so small there on the floating path, with the galaxy stretching out in the dome above them, but his presence was immense. Kaelen, what they see as a flaw is literally what makes you, you. It's the source of your strength. It's what makes you the Empress. Without it, you'd just be another one of them. He gestured vaguely back towards the palace. And you're so much more than that. Her breath caught. No one had ever framed her difference as her strength. It had always been her curse, her cross to bear. To hear it reframed so simply, so powerfully, by this tiny, bold human was like having a locked door in her soul blasted open. She could only stare at him, the glowing light of the garden reflecting in her wide, sapphire eyes. In that moment, surrounded by impossible beauty, Kaelen felt the last of her professional resolve crumble. The walls she had spent a lifetime building around her heart, the armor she wore against the world's judgment, felt thin and fragile. This human, with his messy hair and his blunt honesty and his unwavering gaze, was not just seeing her. He was understanding her. And the terrifying, exhilarating truth was that she wanted him to understand her more. The silence in the Selenian garden was different now, charged and potent, thick with the words Elias had just spoken. You're so much more than that. They hung in the air between them, more real than the floating stones or the luminescent waterfall. Kaelen could only stare at him, her immense form suddenly feeling less like a burden and more like a fact. A simple, powerful fact of the universe, like gravity or light. He had not dismissed her pain. He had reframed it, transforming a lifetime of shame into a badge of honor with a few simple sentences. The warmth that spread through her chest was not the flush of embarrassment but something deeper, something foundational. It was acceptance, and it was coming from the most unexpected source imaginable. Elias, for his part, seemed to realize the weight of his own words. He didn't look away, but a faint, self-conscious smile touched his lips. Sorry, he murmured, though he didn't sound sorry at all. I get a little passionate when I see something beautiful being undervalued. Kaelen found her voice, though it was softer than she intended. There is no need for apology. She turned and continued along the path, her steps slower, more deliberate. He fell into step beside her, the silence between them now comfortable, easy. They reached the center of the garden, a wide, circular platform where the floating paths converged. In its center grew a single, colossal tree with bark like polished silver and leaves that shimmered with captured starlight, each one a tiny, perfect nebula. It was the Heartwood, the oldest living thing in the palace. Kaelen stopped before it, a reverence in her posture. It's magnificent, Elias whispered, his head tilted back to take in its impossible height. It is, Kaelen agreed. It has stood here since the first stone of this palace was laid. It has seen empires rise and fall. She reached out a hand, her fingers gently brushing the silver bark. When I was a child, I believed it could listen, that it held all the secrets of my lineage. Elias watched her, his expression thoughtful. Do you still believe that? She considered the question. I believe it holds a different kind of secret now, the secret of perseverance, of remaining rooted and strong, even when the winds howl. She looked down at him. It is a lesson I have needed. His eyes were soft, understanding. You've had to be the strong one for a long time, haven't you? It wasn't a question that required an answer. They both knew the truth. The moment stretched, filled only by the gentle, chiming song of the garden. Elias took a step closer, then another, until he was standing right beside her, so close she could feel the heat of his body against her leg. He was looking up at the tree, but his presence was a tangible thing, a pull she felt in her very core. "Can I?" he began, then hesitated, uncharacteristically uncertain. "Can I ask you something? Something personal?" Kaelen's pulse quickened. "You may." He turned his head to look up at her, his brown eyes serious. "The dinner last night, was that just about the power grid? Or was it something else?" The directness of the question should have offended her. It should have sent her reeling back into the safety of Imperial protocol. Instead, it felt like a key turning in a lock. She held his gaze, her own defenses lying in ruins around her. "The power grid," she said slowly, each word chosen with care, "was the pretext. The reason I gave my advisors." She took a slow breath, the air feeling thin. "The truth was, I wanted to hear you call me a goddess again." The admission, once spoken, felt both terrifying and liberating. Elias's eyes widened slightly, and then that devastating, lopsided grin spread across his face. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated triumph. "Yeah?" he said, his voice dropping to an intimate murmur. "Well, for the record, it's still true. Maybe even more true now." He took one more step, closing the final, negligible distance between them. He was so close now that if she lowered her hand, her fingertips would brush his shoulder. He had to crane his neck all the way back to look into her eyes. "Kaelen," he said, her name a prayer on his lips. Her heart was hammering against her ribs, a frantic, wild rhythm. Every instinct, every year of her training, screamed at her to retreat, to re-establish the boundary between empress and subject. But a stronger, newer instinct, one born from the warmth in his eyes and the honesty in his voice, held her fast. She was frozen, a statue of amethyst and starlight, waiting. Elias slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, raised his hand. He didn't reach for her face, knowing the scale was still too great, too intimidating. Instead, he pressed his palm flat against the silver bark of the heartwood tree, right beside where her own fingers still rested. Their hands did not touch, but they were parallel, his small and human and capable, hers vast and powerful and regal, separated by only a few inches of ancient, living wood. It was a connection nonetheless, a silent acknowledgement of the bond forming between them, witnessed by the oldest, wisest thing in her empire. "I see you, Kaelen," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the chiming garden. "Not the empress, not the statue. You." A tremor ran through her, so profound it felt like a seismic shift deep within the palace foundations. Her vision blurred, and she had to close her eyes for a second against the sudden, overwhelming surge of emotion. No one had ever said that to her. No one had ever wanted to. When she opened her eyes, the world seemed sharper, more vivid. The colors of the garden were brighter, the song of the flora sweeter. She looked down at his hand, so close to hers, and then back at his face, at the open, hopeful expression he made no attempt to hide. The last of her resistance shattered. "I believe you," she whispered back, and in those 3 words a universe of change was born. The walk back to the archive was made in a silence that was now charged with a new, thrilling understanding. They didn't speak, but the space between them hummed with an energy that was almost audible. When they reached the doorway, Elias paused, turning to look up at her one more time. "Thank you," he said simply, "for the garden, for everything." "The thanks are mine, Elias Thorne," she replied, and she meant it with every fiber of her being. She watched him go, her engineer, her human, the man who saw her, until he turned a corner and was gone from sight. She stood there for a long time, the memory of his hand near hers on the heartwood tree burning brighter in her mind than any star in the celestial dome. Back in her chambers, The silence was no longer oppressive. It was contemplative. Kaelen paced the length of her room, her mind a whirlwind. He saw her. He saw her. And he was not afraid. He was not repulsed. He was enthusiastic. The word sent another delicious shiver down her spine. This changed everything. Changed nothing. She was still the Empress. He was still a human engineer on a temporary contract. The gulf between their stations was as vast as the gulf between their sizes. And yet, the memory of his smile, the conviction in his voice when he defended her, the simple, profound act of standing beside her at the Heartwood, it all felt more real, more substantial, than any title or protocol. She was so lost in her thoughts she didn't hear the soft chime of her door at first. When it chimed a second time, more insistently, she straightened, her Empress mask sliding back into place. Enter. It was Lyros, his gaunt face a mask of strained patience. Your Radiance. The Turonian ambassador has arrived ahead of schedule. He awaits an audience in the Hall of Echoes. Kaelen nodded, her mind already shifting gears, compartmentalizing the whirlwind of emotions Elias had stirred. Very well. I will receive him. As she swept past Lyros, her gown whispering against the floor, she caught his critical gaze sweeping over her, no doubt judging the slight disarray of her hair, the uncharacteristic softness in her eyes. She felt a fresh wave of that fierce protectiveness she'd felt for Elias. She would not let their poison touch this. She would not let them tarnish the first real connection she had felt in a lifetime. She paused at the door and looked back at Lyros, her gaze turning to ice. And Lyros, she said, her voice dropping to a tone that promised glacial consequences. The human engineer, Elias Thorne, is under my personal protection. Any further discourtesy shown to him by any member of this court will be considered a direct insult to the crown. Is that understood? Lyros's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. Then he bowed his head, a sharp, jerky motion. Perfectly, Your Radiance. As she walked to the Hall of Echoes, her stride long and powerful, Kaelen felt a new kind of strength flowing through her. It was not the cold, isolated strength of the throne. It was a warm, defiant strength, forged in a garden and fueled by the words of a man who thought she was a goddess. For the first time, the title of Empress felt not like a sentence, but like a weapon she could wield to protect something precious. The Hall of Echoes lived up to its name, amplifying the faintest sound into a lingering whisper that coiled around the obsidian pillars. The Turonian ambassador, a stout, reptilian being covered in iridescent scales, clicked his claws impatiently as Kaelen took her place upon the central dais. Normally, her entire focus would be on the complex trade negotiations, parsing every nuanced threat and promise in the ambassador's sibilant speech. But today, a part of her mind was elsewhere, back in the Selenian garden, feeling the phantom warmth of a human's presence beside her. I see you, Kaelen. The words were a shield against the ambassador's posturing, a secret source of warmth in the cold, echoing hall. She found her responses were sharper, her patience for diplomatic games thinner. When the ambassador hinted that her unconventional physique might necessitate adjustments to the standard trade tariffs, implying her difference was a weakness, Kaelen didn't just rebut him. She froze him with a look that could have cracked his scales, her voice dropping to a vibration that made the very air hum. The only adjustments being made today, Ambassador, she stated, each word a shard of ice, are to your clearly inadequate understanding of who you are addressing. My physique, as you so delicately put it, is the reason your fleet is not currently drifting as debris in the Cygnus Belt. Remember your place. The ambassador recoiled, his smug demeanor evaporating. The meeting concluded in record time, with the Turonian agreeing to terms far more favorable than Lyros had anticipated. As the scaled diplomat scurried away, Lyros approached, a calculating gleam in his eye. A masterful display, Your Radiance. Your firmness was most effective. Kaelen didn't look at him. Her gaze was fixed on the grand archway, her mind already reaching through the palace, searching for a familiar, warm presence. See that the agreements are logged, Lyros. That will be all. She didn't wait for his response. She moved, her stride purposeful, her destination clear. She found Elias not in the archives or his quarters, but in the heart of the engineering bay, surrounded by the guts of the palace's power core. The air thrummed with contained energy. He was standing on a gantry, his jumpsuit smudged with coolant, directing a team of maintenance drones as they recalibrated a primary plasma conduit. He was in his element, his voice confident, his gestures precise. He was commanding, competent, and utterly captivating. He hadn't noticed her yet, and she took a moment to watch him, this small, powerful man who wielded tools and equations with the same authority she wielded an empire. It was another side of him, another layer of the fascinating whole. Then he turned, wiping his hands on a rag, and saw her. His entire face lit up, the professional focus melting into that warm, open admiration that still managed to steal her breath. Your radiance. To what do I owe the honor? Just getting the primary grid up to your spec. She's a beautiful beast, but temperamental. He patted the humming console beside him with an engineer's affection. I saw the Turonian delegation leaving. Everything go okay? It was concluded satisfactorily, she said, descending the short flight of steps to the main bay floor, the drones pausing their work and bowing their articulated heads as she passed. She stopped before him, the difference in their heights even more pronounced with him on the gantry and her on the floor. She had to look up slightly. The reversal of perspective was strangely intimate. Your work here is progressing well. Thanks to your notes on the harmonic dampeners, he said, his eyes bright. You really did write the book on this, didn't you? Several of them, she replied. This was my first major project after my coronation. I designed the containment field geometry myself. Elias looked from the colossal, world-powering engine back to her, his expression one of pure, unadulterated awe. You never cease to amaze me, he said, and the words were so simple, so genuine, they felt more profound than any poetry. He jumped down from the gantry, landing lightly on the floor beside her, now firmly back in her shadow. The scent of ozone and warm metal clung to him. It was a pleasant, honest smell. So, he began, rocking back on his heels slightly, a nervous energy she hadn't seen in him before. About the garden. Kaelen's heart skipped a beat. Yes, I meant what I said, every word. He looked around the empty, humming bay, then back at her, his gaze intense. And I know I'm just a human. I know there are rules, protocols, a whole galaxy of reasons why this is complicated. But I can't pretend I don't feel this pull towards you. The admission hung in the thrumming air, more dangerous than any plasma leak. Kaelen felt the world narrow to this moment, to this man standing in the engine glow, laying his heart bare before his empress. She could shut it down. She should shut it down. It was the prudent, the safe, the expected course of action. But prudence had left her lonely in a palace of millions. Safety felt like a cage, and she was done living up to expectations. She took a step forward, closing the distance until the hem of her gown brushed against his boots. She saw his breath catch, his eyes widening as he looked up into her face. Elias Thorne, she said, her voice low and resonant, meant for his ears only. Your presence in my life has been the most unexpected and welcome event in recent memory. The rules and protocols have governed my existence for cycles. For once, I find I do not care for them. She saw the hope blossom in his eyes, brilliant and terrifying. He slowly, hesitantly, raised his hand. This time, he didn't stop at a parallel gesture. He reached for her. His fingers, calloused and warm, brushed against the back of her hand where it rested at her side. The contact was electric. His touch was so small, so delicate against her skin, yet it sent a jolt through her entire system, a cascade of sensation that left her feeling dizzy. Her own hand twitched, and then, with a courage she didn't know she possessed, she turned it, allowing his fingers to slide against her palm. It was the lightest of touches, a butterfly's wing against a mountainside, but it was a connection, a real physical connection. He was touching her, and she was allowing it, more than allowing it, She was savoring it. "Is this okay?" he whispered, his thumb stroking a slow, gentle arc against her skin. Kaelen could only nod, her voice lost to the thunder of her own heartbeat. She curled her fingers ever so slightly, creating a cradle for his hand, engulfing it in her own. The sheer scale of it should have been absurd, comical even. But in the humming silence of the engineering bay, with the heart of her palace beating around them, it felt like the most natural thing in the universe. They stood like that for a long moment, neither moving, neither speaking. The world held at bay by the simple, profound act of a touch. It was Elias who broke the spell, though he didn't pull his hand away. "So complicated, but not impossible?" he asked, a tentative smile playing on his lips. Kaelen looked down at their joined hands, at his small, brave fingers resting in the vastness of her palm, and felt a smile of her own, true and unforced, break across her face. "Not impossible," she confirmed, her voice thick with an emotion she had no name for. Just new. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed in the corridor outside the bay. The moment was over, but the shift was permanent. As Lyros and two other advisors entered the bay, their eyes taking in the scene with sharp curiosity, Kaelen didn't step back. She held her ground, her posture once more that of the Empress, but her heart was singing a rebellious human song. She had crossed a line. There was no going back. And as she met Lyros's scrutinizing gaze, she found she didn't want to. The air in the engineering bay, once thrumming with potential, now crackled with unspoken tension as Lyros and the other advisors took in the scene. Kaelen stood tall, her amethyst skin seeming to glow with an inner fire, her expression not one of guilt or fluster, but of serene, unshakable defiance. Elias had taken a respectful step back, his hands now tucked into his pockets, but he didn't cower. He stood his ground beside the massive power core, his gaze steady as he met the calculating stares of the court officials. It was Lyros who broke the silence, his voice a carefully modulated blend of deference and disapproval. "Your Radiance, the Turonian Accords have been logged. We require your final seal on the agricultural trade amendments from the Signian Republic." His eyes flickered towards Elias, a silent accusation. "The matter is time-sensitive." Kaelen did not immediately respond. She let the silence stretch, feeling its weight, feeling the shift in power. For cycles, she had allowed these people, their whispers, their judgments, to define the boundaries of her existence. No more. She had touched something real, something warm and honest in the palm of a human hand, and she would not let them tarnish it. "The Signian amendments can wait until tomorrow's council," she stated, her tone leaving no room for argument. "I am currently overseeing a critical phase of the power grid realignment. Engineer Thorne's work requires my direct attention." It was a lie, a bold-faced and transparent one, and everyone in the bay knew it. The drones were powered down, the diagnostic screens dark. But the challenge in her voice was real. Lyros's thin lips pressed into a tighter line. "Of course, Your Radiance. However, the court schedule..." Kaelen interrupted, her voice dropping to that dangerous, resonant register that promised consequences. "Is mine to command, not the other way around. Is that understood?" The other advisors visibly flinched. Lyros gave a stiff, shallow bow. "Perfectly, Your Radiance." He shot one last, venomous look at Elias before turning and leading the chastened group from the bay. The heavy doors hissed shut, leaving them alone once more in the humming silence. The moment they were gone, the formidable Empress seemed to shrink. Just a little. She let out a slow breath, the tension in her shoulders easing. She looked down at Elias, who was watching her with an expression of pure, unadulterated admiration. "That was incredibly hot," he said, his voice full of awe. Kaelen blinked. "Hot? Yeah, commanding, powerful. You just owned that room. And him." He shook his head, a slow grin spreading across his face. "I've never seen anything like it." The unfamiliar slang and the sheer force of his admiration sent another wave of warmth through her. She found she liked the word. She liked the way he looked at her when she was being imperious. It was a far cry from the fear and discomfort she was used to inspiring. "It was necessary," she said, though a corner of her mouth twitched upwards. "They cannot be allowed to believe they hold sway over my personal attentions." "Well, message received," Elias replied, his grin softening into something more intimate. He took a step closer, back into the space that was now unquestionably theirs. "So, critical phase of the power grid realignment." Huh. Kaelen allowed the smile to fully form. It seemed a plausible excuse. It was perfect. He looked around the empty bay, then back at her, his expression turning earnest. "What happens now, Kaelen? I'm not naive. I know what that was. A declaration. From both of us. What comes next?" She met his gaze, the reality of his question settling around them. What came next was scandal. Political maneuvering. The concerted effort of her entire court to pry them apart. What came next was a battle. But as she looked at him, at the man who saw the strength in her size and the woman behind the crown, she felt no fear. Only a fierce, protective determination. "What comes next," she said, her voice steady and sure, "is that we proceed. With caution but without apology. You are under my protection, Elias. And this," she gestured between the two of them, "is under my protection. Let them whisper. Let them scheme. They have never faced an empress who has something truly worth fighting for." Elias's eyes shone in the core's ambient light. He reached out again, this time with more confidence, and laid his hand over hers where it rested on a control console. His touch was a pledge. "Then I guess I'm not going anywhere." And in that moment, surrounded by the silent, powerful machinery of her world, Kaelen knew it was true. The human wasn't a temporary distraction. He was a permanent shift in her orbit. He was the reason the silence in her chambers would never feel lonely again. He was the one who had looked at her, at all of her, and had seen not too much, but perfect. Before we close this chapter on the Empress and her engineer, remember that the greatest love stories often begin where others see only impossibility. If you believed in Kaelen and Elias, do us a favor and hit that subscribe button. Your next journey into a galaxy where humanity's unique heart makes all the difference is just a notification away.